Hello, welcome to An Abundance Books. My name is Julia and we are here today on the 22nd of November to discuss 11/22/63 by Stephen King. That's right, I actually did it. I can't believe I read this behemoth on time. I started reading this at the beginning of November knowing that I wanted to do a video on the 22nd. So I made a helpful little chart to help me get through it, and as you'll see, I accomplished my goal in record time. I actually finished this on the 16th. And it was a much easier read than I thought it would be, so I'm happy to have read it and I'm happy to discuss it with you. Many thoughts on this. I imagine this will be quite a long video, so I'll try to timestamp down below and be sure to give you spoilers when there will be spoilers. But let's start off with my elevator pitch review of this book. This is a story about a man named Jake who is approached by a friend of his who has found a time portal, and he wants Jake to go back in time and stop the JFK assassination because he thinks that if JFK was still alive, a lot of bad things wouldn't have happened. That's the regular pitch of this, and it is what the book is, but I found that this ended up being so many different genres. Like, it's a very slow book, but like sometimes it's a spy thriller, sometimes it's sci-fi, sometimes it's a small town romance, a family drama. There's also quite a few elements of this that are true crime because he is following Lee Harvey Oswald for most of this, the man who was accused of killing JFK, or did he? So you also have like the fictionalization of real life people in here. It's all very interesting. I know that people laud this as one of King's best written books, like not a horror, this isn't scary at all. And I think I tend to agree. This is very different from King's other things. My experience with King up until this point is Pet Sematary, that one with the train. I read On Writing, which I have right here. I actually really enjoyed this. This is part advice for young writers and part memoir. Very good. And I think this is my favorite King that I've read. I guess that's true. I did really enjoy this. I think I'm gonna give it a 4-star because there were a couple of things that bothered me about it, but I would still highly recommend this even if you're not a King fan, even if you're not a historical fiction fan. Like, this is very just a solid, well-written book that I think anybody could get something out of. Things that I love about this are on like page 15, we're already talking about time travel. Like, we're not having this huge first act to try to talk about what we're doing, and the time travel is pretty well explained and answers a lot of the stupid questions that they might not think of. Like, my immediate thing is when he finds Al and Al says, "I found this thing," he's like, okay, how do you know that what you do in the past will actually affect the future, or like stay until where we are now? And he says, oh yeah, I carved my initials into a tree, here's the tree. Like, perfect. We're already getting all of the stupid stuff out of the way so that we can focus on the story. I thought that the setting of this was really good. We're all over the country. Well, we're mostly in Maine and Texas, and I thought that both of those were really vivid. It's also historical fiction, naturally, being set in the late 50s, early 60s. And part of my personal struggle with historical fiction is that it can sometimes feel like reference humor almost, where it's like, hey, remember this car, remember this song, remember how great everything used to be. And this is mostly using those in service of a bigger story. It definitely does things. It does a lot of referencing for sure, but it is all in service of the character. And I think also having our main character Jake be a time traveler, he's doing a lot to connect things. He's hearing a band before they got big, or visiting a street that like he knows looks different. It all relates back to him personally, so it doesn't feel referencey or like so much for the reader. It feels like it's for the character. I also didn't really mind the length. Like, it's long for sure, but when I was figuring it out, I figured I only had to read 40 pages a day for 21 days to get through this. This edition is $8.49, I believe, but because there are so many eras in this book, it flows really well. It's separated into parts, 6 parts, yeah. So each of them feel distinct, and it's easy to mark your progress on stuff, both like page-wise and plot-wise. You can see where we're going. It is really long though, because the main gimmick with this is the time portal that they find. I don't know where to look, but it drops you into, I think it's September 1958, which means if he wants to make it all the way to 11/22/63, he is living in the past for 5 years. And that's a lot of it. A lot of the like mental struggle for the main character is just making it through those 5 years, the tedium, knowing a lot about certain things and not knowing anything about certain things. It's really good. It makes it into a very different story than Man Goes Back in Time to Stop the JFK Assassination. It becomes much more slow and chill, and this isn't a spoiler, but like if you care about knowing anything, don't listen to me for 5 seconds. The JFK assassination attempt, I'm not going to say whether it succeeded or not, it happens around page 670. So that's a vast majority of this book that you're leading up to this one event and just kind of like having a chill time. There's bits in between, but for the most part, we have a lot of time to focus on other things. I guess I don't have to hold this the whole time. It's heavy. I kind of want to get into talking about some of King's isms in this, because I think there are definitely a lot of through lines through his book that these share. The first one is part of this is set in Derry, which I did not expect, and it's happening right around, I think it's right after the events of It, which is fine, like having a shared universe, sure, go off. But the problem is he goes into Derry and people around him are talking about like, hey, did you hear the thing about the clown? And if I didn't know what it was, I'd be like, sorry, you're talking about a killer clown and we're just not going to discuss it anymore. We're just going to have like 1 or 2 conversations about it and then move on. No, that I would read a whole book about that. And it's because another one's already been written. There was another part in this that felt like it might be related to something. Oh, I remember. In the past, one of the first people that he meets is called the Yellow Card Man. And he thinks the Yellow Card Man might know something about time travel. He's not really sure. And I do wonder if that is a character from something else, because he feels very vivid, but also very underdeveloped. Like he's been developed somewhere else. So if you know, no spoilers, but like, let me know if he's from something. That would be nice. The other big King-ism in here is his relationship with women, which is not great. A lot of this story is taken up by a romantic story, which I liked for the most part, but just there's always something a little off in the way that King talks about women. And I was thinking like, am I being too sensitive about this? But I was thinking this is probably just like a normal thing that like, this is the way most of the world still in 2011 views women. And so that was just really interesting. I'm trying to figure out how to set up this without spoiling it. I guess I'll just jump into it. He's seeing this woman and at one point she's unconscious and he puts her into a cold shower to like try to wake her up, and he's horny during it because her nightgown turns a little bit see-through. And that's just not the way you should react in that situation. I hope nobody actually reacts like that. This feels like King telling on himself. If you react like that, go to therapy, please. And he also has to comment on the appearance of every woman that he meets. He has very strong opinions on if a woman is hot or not based on a 2-second interaction. Every like, the people who work at the bank, we have to decide if they're hot or not. There's a lot of like, she smiled and that made her prettier, or there was one where he's like, she smiled and somehow that made her uglier. And it's like, okay, thanks. You're not describing men this way, but cool. He also doesn't do a great job with minorities. This is set in starting in 1958, which is a tumultuous time in America, and there is lip service paid to it. There's a bit of conversation about separate toilets and a bit about like the start of integration in some places, and it's just like in the news, but he doesn't really have any opinions about it or go out of his way to help any person of color. He's just sort of there and kind of using the time as an excuse. He does this a bit with another woman in the story too, but he just sort of like refuses to engage on this, where he will tamper with other things, but he's like, oh, it's just the time, you know, it's just, it'll get better. There's a black president in 2011. Like, okay. One of my favorite things about reading a book is getting to read the, not acknowledgements, but like an afterword by the author talking about their experience of writing the book. And in this, King says he started trying to write this book in 1972, which is 9 years after the actual events. And it's just so weird to me that like this is a historical fiction take, but like on his own life, something that is like was still very fresh in 72, something that he would have lived through. And also interesting because one of the things that bugged me the most in the book was, in order to make money in the past, Jake has a sports almanac. Now, that's just Back to the Future. That's 100% just stolen from Back to the Future, which like everyone knows Back to the Future. There's no way King doesn't know about it. But considering that he started thinking about this in 72, that might have been something that he wrote before, a whole decade before Back to the Future came out. So I give him a little bit more of a pass on that one, even though it's quite convenient. There's quite a couple conveniences in here, and I don't know, I keep thinking about how time travel would affect things, because he's very careful to not mess up stuff in the past. But the one thing that I keep thinking of is babies, because you have, what, 1 trillion sperm cells, and so if you get home 5 minutes late, then like your whole sitch would have a different configuration, and all future children would be different. The book never explores this thought. That's probably just a me thought, but in general, the time travel rules here make sense. Overall, I'm gonna give it a 4. I did a lot of it on audio, which I did enjoy. I think the narrator did a great job with it, and it really helped me to keep my pace on it. And I would recommend it if it's something that you're interested in. I think that this is a really solid book, and as someone who is very intimidated by long books, this one felt like it justified its length. Though there is one bit right at the beginning where he's talking to Al, and Al says, I get off on tangents sometimes. If I do it, just like yell at me and bring me back. And like not a page later, he starts going on a tangent, and Jake is like, hey, can we get back to the main thing? And he's like, no, 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 this one's actually relevant, which just felt like King telling on himself. Like, I know I do a lot of tangents, but like, let me have this one. This book is just tangents for 5 years until we get to the main event. I think that's the end of non-spoilers. So if you were here for that, thank you, goodbye. Spoiler people, get excited. My biggest issue with this book is in the implementation of Al, because he is very much a plot device. He's the friend that Jake meets right at the beginning who's like, hey, you gotta do the JFK thing for me, because he has lung cancer. He has some kind of cancer, I think. And so he's like, I'm not gonna live for another 5 years in order to be able to do this. I already tried to do this once and I failed, like wasn't at the right place at the right time, so now you have to do it. And he's resistant to it at first, but like eventually agrees to go along with it. My problem is that Al is the emotional core of the story, like the inciting incident, the reason why, and he's just not in it after the first part. When Jake goes into the rabbit hole for the first or second time, Al just leaves. He just says, hey, I can't be here for this. I don't feel like it. Leaves a note, never seen again. Because the problem is, at the end of the book, we successfully stopped the JFK assassination. Spoiler, but like, it's on the back of the book, so presumably they succeed. And then he goes back into present time and everything's gone to shit, because of course it has. I would have been interested in this book a little more, I think, if it didn't kind of suddenly turn magical at the end and actually explored what could have potentially happened if JFK had lived. I know it's hard to do and I'm getting ahead of myself, but basically Al isn't there, and I think it was just because King didn't know how to do it. I think that Al being there would have conflicted with like, where does Al live? What if Al died in the past? Does he still have memories? If you leave him standing in the shop, and because it only takes 2 minutes for you to time travel, no matter how long you're in the past, it's always 2 minutes in the present. If he's just standing there, but then the diner isn't a diner anymore when he comes back, what happened to Al? And I think King just didn't know how to handle that. Because what I really wanted, so what happens in the book is, so Jake's love interest Sadie dies during the stopping of the JFK assassination. And Jake is like, okay, I'm gonna just do it again. I'm just gonna save Sadie. I know exactly what I have to do now so that she and I can live happily forever in the past together. And he doesn't end up doing that, because when he goes to the present again, everything has gone to shit because the magic earthquakes started. He messed with the past, so now there are magic earthquakes that just kind of are shaking the earth apart. And that's not a very interesting conflict. What I wanted there to be was for Al to be there waiting for him, being like, you did it, this is so much better now. Or like, you know, these couple things went wrong, but like, we can get through it. I can't believe you actually did it. Or like make different requests of him or something. And for that conflict to be, I want to go back for a person versus like saving the world, and having people represent that conflict rather than Jake just kind of doesn't have a choice. Like, the world's gonna shake apart and he probably doesn't want that. So he has to go back and leave the past the way it was. And I just wanted to know how Al felt about all of this stuff. Because like, if he died, he could die. Like, you could just have him die, but then let me see that scene. I don't like the idea that Al is out there and we don't get to hear from his perspective. I hate the earthquakes. I think the earthquakes are so dumb and so cheap. It removes all agency from all of our characters. It removes any sort of choice that they have, because it's not a good world and a better world, or a bad world and a slightly less bad world. It's a world or no world, which isn't really a choice, especially when Jake doesn't really have to do anything in order to put it back. He just has to walk through the door and walk back out again, and the whole past will reset. It just felt like a very lame climax. I do like what they ended up doing with it, that he meets old Sadie in the present timeline and she's like in her 80s, and it's nice. It's a fine ending, but like from a sci-fi and a character perspective, I didn't like it. My other problem is I was so impressed with how they explained the time travel in the beginning. Like, it wasn't perfect. They didn't explain everything, but there was clearly an attempt to understand what the characters understand, even though they're just like laymen. But then you get to the end of the book and there's the yellow card man turned into something else, and there's another yellow card man who seem to be stewards of time or something. It's not really explained. So you spend this whole time like being firm on the rules of time travel and the consequences of it, and then you get to the end and it's like, lol, no. Like, it's so stupid. I think if they wanted that, they could have introduced it earlier, because the only thing that they introduce is the idea that the past doesn't want to be changed, which I like, and it presents itself in a bunch of different ways, which are cool. That just felt like an obstacle for our hero to get over, and less of like a moral conundrum. I just think if you wanted it, you could have had the yellow card man be a soft protagonist throughout, instead of like a plot twist at the end that isn't really explained. But overall, I had a great time with this. I actually cried a little bit at one point, not at the end. Didn't care about the end, didn't care about Sadie. I do wonder if I have the audiobook narrator to blame for that, just because it's a man doing a woman's voice and it's not great. But no, the part where Jake is a teacher in the past and he puts on a school play and they do the play and everyone in the audience is crying because the play is so good, and I'm crying because everyone else is crying, and that was just really nice and really unexpected from this kind of a story. Yeah, Jake is a teacher both in the present and in the past, and so yeah, there's some really cool stuff that they're able to do there. I also really loved the opening of this, where he goes back in time in order to help one of his students. He finds out that one of his adult students, he's like in his 60s or something, that his father went on a massacre and killed his whole family, and it just happens to coincide with the date that Jake is going back to, so he stops that in order to like see how it affects Harry. And so I really liked that, the little mini adventure before we get to the big adventure, and that it got to be set in Derry, and you know, King got to do what he wanted out of that, which I thought it worked really well. And then after that we travel a bit, we spend a majority of our time with him as a school teacher in Jody, and it's got just like a really nice cast of characters just kind of dealing with everyday life, and it's lovely. The part that started to lose me a little bit was immediately after that. We do a lot of spy stuff. We're spying on Lee Harvey Oswald for a good portion of this, and it's just not interesting because Jake isn't doing anything. He's not inserting himself into their lives in any way. He's bought some spy equipment and is renting the room under them so that he can listen to them. It's kind of a lull in the story, which is too bad because it happens at such a critical point. And I definitely do feel a little bit weird about the fictionalization of real people, especially like, why can't I remember her name? Yeah, her name is Marina. Marina is Lee Harvey Oswald's wife, and he beats her, and Jake knows all of this and does nothing about it, and doesn't even have like an internal conflict about like going to stop it. He's just like, well, I can't because of the future. It would be nice if the man had a conscience and like could mess up a little bit in order to succeed or grow as a person. That doesn't really happen. But yeah, overall I was just really impressed with this book. I'm really happy to have gotten around to it. I'm happy to have done this on the 60th anniversary of the day. I guess that's not really something to celebrate, but it was a really cool experience, and I'm so happy to be able to recommend this to people. I feel like I've barely scratched the surface in this review because so much does happen and you're constantly jumping between things, and yeah, highly recommend. Feels like I'm talking myself into a 5, but I'm gonna stay strong. But anyway, that's it for me. Have you read 11/22/63? Let me know all of your thoughts in the comments below. If you have any questions, if you have any other recommendations for me based on this, I would really appreciate it. All right, that's it for this, and I'll see you in another video very soon.